So now let me tell you a little bit about Jim Axelrod. Jim Axelrod is the national correspondent for CBS News. He previously served as chief White House correspondent. Jim has covered many stories over the past few years, but most notably the war in Iraq. He was one of CBS News' embedded correspondents and was recognized for being the first television journalist to report live from Saddam International Airport in Baghdad immediately after its takeover by the United States. In addition, his live report of the US Army firing artillery rounds into Iraqi positions was the first to be broadcast from a reporter embedded with combat troops engaged in combat, with ground troops engaged in combat, I'm sorry. Some of the other stories he's covered: the invasion of Afghanistan, the war and refugee crisis in the Balkans, the hostage crisis in Peru. Do you see a trend here? So after spending all that time in Iraq and Afghanistan and at the White House itself, is it any wonder that Jim Axelrod is now actively searching for some happiness? So you can actually find Jim blogging on the subject of happiness for CBS, but he's also written a book about it called In the Long Run, A Father, a Son, An Unintentional Lesson in Happiness. So now that he's done all that research, let's invite him to share with us the secrets he's found out on how to live a happy life. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jim Axelrod.
I first want to just thank the Fair Media Council for having me out here. I think the work you folks do is so crucial, especially in this day and age where there are so many news outlets. We could sit here and get news from now till next Tuesday, and it becomes ever more important that somebody can give an imprimatur and say, you know what, these guys are doing it right, or these people aren't doing it right. Some group without an axe to grind can keep an eye on a business that desperately needs the eye. So first of all, to the Fair Media Council, thank you for having me. I also want to thank Reverend Butts for his words a few moments ago. Every time I'm in the presence of this man, I feel my soul lifted and my sense of humanity deepened. So thank you, sir, for your presence here. So Jackie tells you who I am and lists a couple of career accomplishments, and here I am, national correspondent for CBS, sat in the front row of the press room next to Helen Thomas. I won an Emmy, and my 15-year-old daughter cares about one thing only, that I sat 2 seats from Robbie Rosen. You should have seen what happened in our house the night he goes out. She's in tears, my 13-year-old's, I'm out of here. The 8-year-old's wondering if there's any justice in the world. We're really just recovering. So, first of all, that national anthem, off the charts. Secondly, when I get done, it really was wonderful, wonderful. I'm a big believer in public crying, especially for men, and I found myself very, very moved. I'm going to ask you to do me a favor when we get done here. You're calling my daughter's cell phone, and you're leaving a message, all right? And then I need someone to take a picture because you're going to say, Daddy, who'd you get to do that? Anyway, I'm probably not going to make it through the whole speech without crying myself, so I apologize before we start. But it really is, it's really wonderful to be with you. It's just good to be out of the office, to be honest with you. This has been a crazy news week, right? My week started at 2:30 in the morning, Monday, when I was sliding behind my desk. That phone call telling me that bin Laden had been killed, I mean, I just hopped right out of bed and got into to CBS. By 6 o'clock in the morning, I was standing in front of a firehouse at 48th and 8th in Midtown. So that's Engine Company 54, Ladder Company 4, Battalion 9. These guys lost 15 men on 9/11. And it was an enormously moving place to be on Monday morning. It was to watch New Yorkers walk by on their commute and stick their heads inside the door of the firehouse and just say congratulations and thank you. One of the biggest challenges for reporters sometimes, or at least for this reporter, is to hold back his tears. And kind of lost the battle that morning. New Yorkers have always had a very strong connection with their firefighters. But in the last 10 years, that connection has cinched ever tighter. And as I say, the firehouse where I was had lost 15 firefighters, left a total of 28 kids without fathers. And the emotions that I was watching as I began to talk to people there, all very raw, but a wide range, I think reflecting what first responders around the city were feeling on Monday. 343 firefighters, of course, 37 Port Authority police officers killed on 9/11, 23 New York City police officers killed. That's more than 400 families who had lost someone on 9/11. At the end of one range, at one extreme on the range of feelings, was a woman named Maureen Santora. Now, she had lost her son, Chris, who had been on the fire department for 3 months. You may know the story. And he goes down in 9/11, 3 months on the job as a probie, and he's killed. She was joyous, positively joyful. She told me, I'm sure that Chris was looking down on me this morning saying, we got him, Ma, we got him. A little while after, I spoke to another firefighter by the name of John Fila. He was a little more somber. I asked him why. He said, well, this probably means our job has just gotten a little bit more dangerous. Remember, this firehouse on the front lines, these were the guys who responded when Faisal Shahzad tried to blow up Times Square last year. These were the guys who prevented that. They see it all. And John Fila was aware that their job had probably gotten a bit more dangerous. And then I asked him if he knew Chris Santora. He said, yes, very softly. We switched shifts. On 9/11, he was working for me. In other words, firefighter Fila has spent the last 10 years walking around trying to make sense of the senseless. Why was he alive and Chris Santora wasn't? Of course, in classic FDNY form, my interviews were interrupted because an alarm went off, and all these guys had to hop in the truck, and off they go. So we've been sitting here trying to figure out the meaning. They don't have time to dwell, because just like they did on 9/11, they've got a job to do. But it is clear as this week has progressed that in some meaningful way, the death of Osama bin Laden is a bookend to that tragic day nearly 10 years ago. I'm sure everybody in this room has their own perspective. I bet a fair number of you know someone personally who was lost on 9/11, family member or a friend, or know someone who lost someone. 9/11 is a lot of things to a lot of people. I will never forget the sky that day. I'm sure you all remember it well, right? Perfect September day. It's what I call one for all weather. So if you had to pick one day's weather for all 365 days of the year, that was September 11th. I love September weather. Favorite time of the year. I got married in September. In fact, 9/11 is a lot of things to a lot of people. It was my 8th wedding anniversary, which is why I was a little late getting my bus into Manhattan from Montclair, New Jersey that morning. I'd stayed behind a little while to linger over a second cup of coffee with my wife and count our blessings. And that is why I just missed getting through the Lincoln Tunnel and instead sat there in Hoboken watching the biggest story of my career unfold just a few miles away. Biggest story of my career. I could see it, but I couldn't get there. Now, I am not proud of this. But the truth is, to tell the truth is what we do as reporters. I'm supposed to tell the story as it happened. 10 years ago, I was so focused on my career. My ambition was so totally blinding that while such horror and devastation gripped Lower Manhattan, all I could see was an enormous professional opportunity slipping through my fingers. So one of the things I've been thinking about this week, in addition to the journey that this city has taken in the last 10 years, is how far I've traveled as well. It's all here in this book. In the long run, a father, a son, and unintentional lessons in happiness. So if it's all right with you folks, I'd just like to share a little some of what I've been thinking about. My book's about a lot of things, about career, about ambition. It's about fathers and sons, midlife crises, mid-course corrections, running a marathon. But more than anything, my book's about a chase after that highly elusive commodity, that elusive state of well-being, happiness. Funny thing about happiness, I don't think we think about it enough in our culture. Walk into a cocktail party. You always know who the richest guy is in the room, right? You always know who's got the best-looking spouse, whose kids got into the best colleges, who drives the nicest car, who's got the lowest golf handicap. None of which, by the way, accurate predictors of happiness. Well, maybe the handicap. But we never know who the happiest person is in the room. I can tell you for many years, as I was climbing the ladder in network news, I was not the happiest person in the room, not even close, because I was too narrowly focused on goals that weren't particularly well thought out to make me happy. Luckily, two things happened to me. One, I came a little too close to getting killed. And then I followed it with something that I thought even worse than that at the time. I had a career misstep. Together, these two events finally forced me to make a deeper consideration of my life, and ultimately, finally forced me onto a path in pursuit of happiness. My story begins in a Humvee at the base of a bridge over the Euphrates River in Iraq. I was a correspondent covering the start of the Iraq War, embedded with the 1st Brigade of the 3rd Infantry Division of the United States Army. After missing 9/11 in New York, I was not about to miss another story that I thought could shape, if not define, my career. I'd gone right to Afghanistan after 9/11. I was there by the 21st of September. And I'd put my hand up to embed less than a year and a half later as the Iraq War was starting. Now, the military had blown it with the first Gulf War, censoring some of the best footage that put the military in its best light. And they were very eager not to repeat that mistake. So they stuck network teams with all of the lead units. And my team was composed of a legendary CBS cameraman named Mario Di Carvalho. He'd been with the Portuguese Special Forces fighting the Cubans in the jungles of Angola before spending the next 30 years as a combat photographer for CBS News. Then there was Jeff Thorpe Willett, a satellite engineer who'd been in the British Navy before working for a number of different TV outlets in places like Bosnia and Kosovo and Somalia and Rwanda, Yemen and Gaza. Then there was me. I was a guy who needed diapers. Our Humvee pulled to the base of the bridge, and a soldier walked over to talk to Mario, who was driving. Now, up to this point, you have to understand we'd encountered very little resistance from the Iraqis. This was the largest number of troops moving the greatest distance in the shortest period of time in military history. It had been like a knife through butter, but we knew it was about to change because the Iraqis knew that once the US forces got over the Euphrates, the gig was up. So they had massed their troops and artillery on the other side. And as we looked across the Euphrates, it was like something out of Apocalypse Now. We saw Apache helicopters moving in and out of swaying palm trees, thick plumes of black smoke rising up from where they'd taken out some of the Iraqi units. But we could hear plenty of explosions, mortar, rocket-powered grenades, all kinds of artillery, which indicated the Iraqis were indeed fighting back from fortified positions. "All right, sir," said the soldier as he stuck his head in our window. "Here's what I need you to do." And he explained to us that while the Iraqis would be lobbing all kinds of artillery at us, their antiquated targeting systems were so primitive that they wouldn't be able to keep pace with us as we went up the bridge. "So I need you to hit the gas, sir. Hit the gas and keep moving. Pedal to the metal. They can't hit a moving target. When I wave you to go, you go. Move, 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 move. Keep moving, you'll be fine. They'll never be able to catch up with you." Well, we were about fourth or fifth in line, the military wanting the cameras to be among the first over the bridge to get the best pictures. Or at least that's what they told us. The soldier waved us through. Mario hit the gas, and we started up the incline. We could hear the bullets and the RPGs and the mortar. Whatever the Iraqis had, they were throwing at us. But the specialist was right. As long as we moved up the incline, nothing could catch up to us. It was exhilarating. There's this whole side competition among reporters in a situation like that to see who's going to be first to Baghdad. And it looked like we were about to win a very important leg of the race. "Move over, boys," was the feeling inside the Humvee. "Here comes the A-team. Next stop, Baghdad." Not exactly. All of a sudden, just as we approached the crest of the hill, our Humvee died. I mean dead. You know that sick sound of the alternator? Click, 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 which is fine if it's in your driveway in Long Island. Now, while the Iraqis couldn't hit a moving target, a sitting duck was an entirely different story. So Mario and Jeff, combat veterans that they were, hopped out to check under the hood and see if they could get the Humvee moving again. I stayed in the back of the Humvee and curled into the fetal position, angling my helmet in the direction of fire as if that's going to help. And I could hear the bullets drawing closer. And I started to think of my wife, 7 months pregnant at home, just waking up our children in lovely Montclair, New Jersey, 7 and 5 years old, with no idea what was happening to their husband and their father. And I started to get angry, really pissed off at myself. And I remember between my tears and my soaking wet pants, I started yelling at myself. How did I get here? How did I get here? How the hell did I get here? And just then I felt a jolt. It was a big RV, the crew from Nightline. Now, you thought I was a Ted Koppel fan before. They'd seen the entire thing develop. They locked up on our bumper, and they pushed us over the bridge. Now, when I got home, I'd always tell this story, and I kind of had a stock punchline at the ready about this very terrifying episode in my life and about how ABC bailed us out. Yeah, we were first over the Euphrates, our competition right on our tail. Well, it was a good line, but it actually spoke to an even bigger problem than the bridge. I had no idea how I'd ended up on the bridge. How'd I get here? I couldn't answer the question. That's a problem. How'd I get here? I had no answer. But instead of beginning to examine my life and try to get an answer to that question, what was I doing there? I'd found a funny way to distance myself from the real questions, and in the process, avoid facing up to a way that I was living my life that had almost gotten me killed. I had blinders on. Blinders that didn't allow me to examine the role of ambition in placing me on that bridge. Blinders that weren't allowing me to examine my own definition of success, nor what I would or wouldn't do to achieve it. Blinders that didn't allow me to examine what kind of father and husband I could be if the best energy that I had was focused on getting ahead and climbing a ladder. And blinders that certainly prevented me from focusing on the most important question of all: if how I was living my life had any chance of making me happy. Now, of course, this would be a really neat and clean story if I could sit here and look at all of you and say that having survived the bridge, properly chastened, I headed home, begged forgiveness from my wife for putting her through all of this, and with a new sense of enlightenment, lived a more satisfied and happier existence. It would have been neater and cleaner, and it would have been a good plot line for some TV movie, but it was entirely at odds with reality. Maybe you'd find that in Hollywood. I live in New Jersey. To make a long story short, and if you want to make it long, Amazon.com, punch my name in. I had enough PTSD to keep a world-class trauma shrink hopping for a couple of months. I didn't handle my return home with any particular grace. I was detached from my wife, my kids, my friends, and I dove right back into work. You see, the war had elevated my profile. That's how it works in the news business. I was now a war correspondent, which was one of the reasons, after all, I put my hand up to begin with. And with my freshly punched ticket, I got myself assigned to the John Kerry campaign. I did good work there, and in 2006, CBS News sent me to Washington to cover George W. Bush. In my mind, things couldn't have been going any better. Whatever lessons I might have learned from the bridge about the possible consequences of unrestrained ambition were left behind as I ascended another rung on the ladder. Then I started doing the work. Peel away all the trappings of the White House correspondent, and it's basically a job reporting on public policy. It's critically important work. It's the most important daily journalism posting that there is. It's a demanding job. It's extremely difficult to do well. But ultimately, it wasn't for me. My big mistake was not grasping the fundamental nature of the job before I took it. I loved the White House receptions, the good seats at the Kennedy Center honors. I liked flying on Air Force One, my kids going to movies at the White House Theater. I loved posting up on the north lawn of the White House in my trench coat and asking questions of the most powerful man in the world. But after several hundred live shots, I'd started to notice that the just the facts reporting was rather dry for my taste. During my whole career, The stories I loved most, the richest and most satisfying pieces, the ones that filled me with pride and made me well up with tears, were stories that drew on some essential connection between the viewer and the subject. The kid with cerebral palsy outside Denver, whose most effective therapy was riding a wild Mustang, broken and trained for the job by maximum security prison inmates. Or the team of volunteer doctors delivering babies amid the hopelessness and squalor of a refugee camp in Macedonia. Or the Army unit in Iraq that lost 2 master sergeants in 24 hours during the invasion. Those were the stories I'd want my kids to show after I was dead and gone, and someone asked, "So what did your dad do for a living?" I'd been paid well to travel around the world and tell exactly those kinds of stories, and yet without the slightest trace of a second thought, I'd abandoned the job that let me do just that, turning away from what I loved most and did best to chase some bullet points for my resume and take a shot at becoming a bold-faced name. Guided by how a job looked rather than how it felt, I sold a house we loved, left a town where we were settled, and dragged my wife and kids somewhere none of them wanted to go, all to undertake the kind of work that never captivated me. Bad fit. Very bad fit. In fact, I couldn't have picked a worse fit, which made perfect sense because I'd taken the wrong measurements when I took the job. And let me tell you something, folks. In life, nothing ever good comes from a bad fit. Now look, this wasn't nearly dying on a bridge, but my assignment as I headed out on the campaign trail for the 2008 campaign to cover Hillary Clinton was not without its own dangers. Campaign trail can be a very dangerous place when it comes to your health. Days and weeks away from home, 3 cups of coffee in the morning to get going, a few too many vodkas at night to slow down. I was eating every kind of sausage, biscuit, and dollar menu cheeseburger that awaited me at the bottom of every exit ramp. For years, I thought of myself as 5 feet, 10 and a half, 180, including 5 extra pounds I could easily melt away with a month of jogging 3 or 4 times a week. I got home from a trip after splitting a pair of pants, just putting them on, stepped on a scale, and found out I wasn't within 30 pounds of that number. Again, I was asking myself a question with my gut in the mirror. How'd I get here? How the hell did I get here? Luckily for me, I started to get an inkling about what might have gone wrong. It had hit me the week before in Houston. I was at the Toyota Center in Houston to watch Barack Obama. As he approached the stage and I got ready to go on, my BlackBerry went off. I had no time to check the email, beyond the basics, who was sending it, the subject heading, just to make sure no one was forwarding any last-second development that might affect our coverage. A quick look told me it could wait. It was from my best friend, Dave. He'd been trolling the internet and found these old records from the New York Marathon. Not any old records, but those from my late father, who'd run it 3 times when he ran the marathon in the early 80s. After the coverage ended, I climbed down off the riser. I found a dull brown metal folding chair, collapsed, leaning against the wall. I grabbed it, unfolded it, sat down, and rocking slightly back and forth with my BlackBerry, extended at arm's length to accommodate my rapidly deteriorating vision, which I'd been refusing to acknowledge. I opened the email. All right, let's see here. He ran 3:39:53 when he was 45. 3:39:53 when he was 45. I kept repeating this, digesting what I was seeing. 3:29:58 when he was 46. That stopped me for half a second. I remembered my dad telling me that when I was a kid, and he was in the middle of his training, that breaking 3:30 was a big deal. Those of you who are runners know what I'm talking about. Going sub 3:30 means a little more than 26 miles in a row at less than 8 minutes a mile. That's an impressive pace. He broke 3:30 when he was 46. I continued to myself, and I sat and rocked for about a half minute more, thinking of the framed photograph I had hanging in the front hallway of our home in Chevy Chase, Maryland. My father, enraptured, crossing the finish line of one of those marathons in Central Park, his arms thrusting straight in the air. Triumph. I needed some of that. His body may have been exhausted, but his eyes were dancing. A running magazine had actually published the picture, clearly looking to inspire. I started to hear a voice go off in my head. Well, I'd need at least a year. I'd never run a marathon, but I'd watched my dad. I knew the kind of dedication required just to finish one, never mind run one in 8-minute miles. The old man was already in top shape when he did it, having run steadily for 4 years before he took on the challenge. I didn't even pause. I could do this. Slightly delusional. I was in the worst shape of my life, flabby in every imaginable way. I couldn't run to the bathroom. Might be just what I need. I tried to slow myself down, take full measure of what I was contemplating, but I couldn't. My very next thought was on me in a heartbeat, and it wasn't a choice. It was instinct. I wonder if I can run it faster than he did. Finally, I had a clue. I wonder if I can run it faster than he did. What I realized as I started my training in fairly short order was that there was no way I was ever going to be able to run a marathon as fast as my father had. I didn't get within an hour of his time. And that couldn't have mattered less. Because what I learned in my 19 months of training to run the 2009 New York Marathon were lessons that helped me chart a path to a much happier life and rendered all those questions about how fast I did it absolutely irrelevant. By the time I crossed the finish line in Central Park, November 1st, 2009, I knew exactly why I was on that bridge in Iraq. I'd been there because I'd applied my father's rules for his life to my own. Never mind that they hadn't worked out so well for him all the time. I'd never asked if they would fit me. I learned work can't fill you up, and that seeking status and validation, a higher profile, a bold-faced name, were simply empty calories, and that a marriage only thrives and children only prosper if a husband and a father is settled in his soul, and that you better have a well-thought-out, life-tested definition of success that you could recite instantly if someone woke you up in the middle of the night and asked you what it is. I learned how to live a life that fit. You know how I knew that lesson had taken? Right after I left the White House, after President Bush's term expired, I pitched a story to the CBS Sunday morning broadcast, a profile of a man named Craig Robinson, the head basketball coach at Oregon State University, who had quite a compelling backstory. Two-time Ivy League Player of the Year at Princeton, Robinson had gone on to a very successful career in finance in Chicago. He was making a ton of money. Raised in a working-class family that had scrapped it out on the south side of Chicago, he was pulling down a high six-figure income. Had all the homes, the cars, the vacations that went with it. He was living the dream. Well, he was living a dream, but not his. Coach Rob's heart wasn't in finance. It belonged to basketball. He may have been the richest guy in the room, but he wasn't the happiest. All the more rare, he knew it. So he took a 90% pay cut to get back into college coaching. 9 years later, he had taken over the Oregon State University program, a former national power that had fallen on hard times. It was especially galling to the Oregon State fans that they were being outplayed by their hated rival, the University of Oregon, in games so intense that they're referred to as the Civil War. So heading into the first Civil War game against Oregon, Coach Rob was beginning to make strides in his mission to return Oregon State to its former glory. Terrific story about a man who had made an intriguing mid-course correction once he realized the suit he'd been wearing for the previous decade no longer fit. Oh, and he's Michelle Obama's brother. What was going on in that house? When I told my wife I was going to Oregon, she suggested I take my oldest son, who had been showing a developing interest in basketball. I shut her down almost immediately, thinking it would make me look like a rank amateur to show up to interview Coach Robinson with my kid in tow. I also didn't know if my 11-year-old could handle it. During the main interview, Coach Robinson is sitting with me in a quiet VIP room at the top of the football stadium, and I asked my kid, Will, to sit in a chair at a long conference table to the left of where the cameras were set up. I wanted him out of the way as I conducted the interview, but still close enough to see everything. Because up to sitting next to Robbie Rosen, that's what I did to impress my kids. So there we are. Will's not in my direct line of sight, but in the middle of the interview, out of the corner of my eye, I see Will start to stand up. And I'm thinking to myself, what is he doing? Now, I wasn't about to stop the interview because Coach Robinson is just getting to the part where he meets Barack Obama for the first time and takes him to a playground to see what kind of game he has. This is the gold we've traveled the country, cross country to get. And in the middle of all that, my son is standing up. So I don't want to stop things to find out what he's up to, but I got to keep an eye on it. Careful to stay at a camera range, Will walks over to the corner where we'd piled our jackets, and he starts to deliberately sift through the pile, and I'm watching this out of one eye. What the heck is going on here? And just as that thought started to creep into my head, see, I knew this wasn't a good idea, and my irritation's beginning to spike, and I can't wait to call home and tell my wife I was right. I see my son reach down into the pile of jackets and pull his out, and he pushes it to his face, and he sneezes. So smart. He was muffling the sound so it wouldn't disrupt the interview. When the interview was over, Coach Robinson shakes my hand. He says, that's quite a mature kid you got there. The next day, as the clock ticked down, final seconds of a close game, the crowd inside Gill Coliseum started to go bleacher-shaking nuts. Now, the public relations folks had been great. They gave a press pass to Will as well as to me, and they were like golden tickets, gave us the run of the place. So Oregon State's dribbling down at the end of this very close game to take the last shot. And Will and I are standing at the edge of the tunnel that leads to the locker room, just off the corner of the court, no more than 15 feet from the action. I put Will in front of me, wanting to have both arms on his shoulders in case the fans stormed the court, and I needed to move him quickly from the mob. I looked down at him. He's biting the inside of his right cheek, very excited, very nervous. And Oregon State comes down, and right in front of us, they nail a basket with 3 seconds left to win the game. And with security guards holding back the crowd, all of us, the coaches, the players, Will, myself, we all get swept into the locker room, where the players started dancing and chanting in celebration. One of the players trained his wide, goofy smile on my son and demanded, "High five, little man." Will slapped hands with him, and I turned my head because I wasn't sure about the propriety of a reporter bringing his son into a locker room, but I certainly knew if he did, the reporter shouldn't be seen crying. Here I was, doing a story on a guy who'd made a mid-course correction to find a better fit and in the process found much more happiness, and bringing my son with me while I did it, changing the way I did business to give my kid a great experience and be away from home 1 or 2 less nights than I would have ordinarily been. And I was playing by my rules, no one else's. And I thought to myself, how'd I get here? I knew exactly how I'd gotten here. And that bridge never felt further away. Thank you very much for your time.
Just a quick thank you to Jim Axelrod, who was so kind to donate his time and his talent to be with us today. A little token of appreciation, hopefully for your wall.
Thank you.
With a career like yours, we don't feel the need to talk about it. So instead, we thought it was more important to thank you for inspiring all of us with your pursuit for happiness.
Thank you.
So we hope that we'll remind you on a daily basis.
I'll put that up in the study.
Good.
Thank you so much. That's just wonderful.
You are welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Hold it up. Official photo.
Terrific. Thank you.
At the FOLIO Awards, we're honored to have Jim Axelrod, national correspondent for CBS Network News, part of this, but local news has always been part of your background, too.
Absolutely. I grew up in local news. I started in Bangor, Maine. I think I was there for about 2.5 weeks. Then the Utica, Syracuse, Raleigh, North Carolina, one of the great TV stations in America, WRAL, and then I'm with CBS after that.
CBS, and you were the correspondent of the White House for a number of years, working for CBS, which continues to be the premier news organization.
Thank you, Ernie. We take it pretty seriously, and it's really nice of you to say that.
Well, but local was the start. That was it.
Yeah, you know, local news, first of all, is the backbone of a community, right? You need informed people living in any community to make that community go. And for me, the best training in the business, the journalism business, is to work in local news, where you may do 3, 4, 5 stories a day. It helps you sharpen up and refine all your skills as far as writing and broadcasting. And, you know, it's I miss being part of local communities in the way that local reporters always are.
But you brought that sensibility to being one of the first, if not the first, American correspondent in Baghdad.
You know, it's funny. I remember being on the runway, scared out of my wits, really not quite knowing what was out there in terms of sniper fire. And in a situation like that, you rely on your training, right? And all my training was in local news. So in some respects, it was Baghdad, it was Saddam Hussein Airport, it was the 3rd Infantry Division taking the airport and establishing a beachhead in Baghdad. But in some ways, it was very similar to floods, fires, and hurricanes that I had covered in Syracuse and Raleigh.
What a story. I mean, we're so thrilled that you're here. He's also from New Jersey, incidentally.
That's exactly
So from
right.
New Jersey to the world, and now here. The Fair Media Council, which is the organization that is honoring you today, and which you're our keynote speaker, is an amazing organization because they've taken news and they hold local news responsible for what they do. And that's pretty admirable. And your being here speaks to that, your experience.
You know, it's a very good point, because in the day and age in which we live, with the media culture that all of us work in, I think oversight and having your feet held to the fire is crucial, critically important, because there are so many sources of news now. You go on the web, we can sit here from now till next Tuesday going through different news outlets, correct? The critical question is, which are worthy of our trusting? And that's no longer a one-way relationship. The new media, of course, has made it much more of a two-way relationship than ever existed before. So the more we have the imprimatur, the stamp from people such as the Fair Media Council saying, hey, you know what, guys, you missed this, or you know what, guys, good job there. I think the more it lets the community know, we're not telling you we're doing a good job. Some independent body is saying, hey, they're doing it right. And that's very important in this day and age.
Now, before you leave us, you're an author also. And I was reading about this great book, which Jim is the author of, In the Long Run. And it speaks of your being part of a marathon, but it also speaks of overcoming this new challenge. What a great story.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's coming out next week. It'll be on sale. In the Long Run is the name of the book.
Let's get a good shot there for...
Sure, that'd be great. Don't mind getting a good shot. And you know what? Basically, the story, it's about a lot of things. It's about careers. It's about ambition. It's about father-son relationships. It's about midlife crises, mid-course corrections, training for a marathon. But mostly what this book's about is the chase after happiness. So often in careers, we get so focused. We're going to be talking about that today in the keynote. You can have your field of vision so narrowed by the prize that your eyes are on. The ambition can take over. And you don't reflect about the bigger, more important questions, such as, are you happy? You living a good life? You being a good husband? You being a good father? Because all you do sometimes is reach for that next rung on the ladder. So this is a very personal story about my experience in climbing that ladder and at some point realizing, hey, wait a minute. I may be getting higher on the ladder, but I'm also moving off the path at the same time. So I hope there's something in there for a lot of folks, because I'm not the only one that goes through the process of asking themselves these questions.
Jim, you represent what CBS is all about so well, and I'm looking forward to the next chapters in the saga of Jim Axelrod.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you chatting with me and taking some time with me today.
Thank you for being here with us.
My pleasure, Ernie.